Hi, and welcome to this NPTEL course titled Trauma and Literature, where we're looking at Joseph Heller novel Catch-22. So this is the second last session on this novel. We'll wind up with this novel in the subsequent session. But as we're looking at certain selected passages from the novel in terms of looking at how, or examining how this could be located as a very important text in the study of trauma and literature, not least because of the way in which trauma is represented in a pseudo-comical way, in a tragicomic, pseudo-comic, dark comic way, where the notion about human loss and suffering is often quite cynical. And the cynicism which emerges in a novel is often a cynicism which emerges out of exhaustion, the exhaustion of tragedy or the possibilities of tragedy. And then, of course, it has a very postmodernist way of representing space and time. And that's also the way in which we are studying the text in terms of looking at certain selected passages which are not necessarily chronological in order. So this should be on your screen. This is chapter 39 called The Eternal City. And this is where we come by the phrase Catch-22. And we get a sense of what it really is or what it really isn't. And there's a very interesting ontological play between presence and absence, which we'll see as captured by the phrase Catch-22, which is also the title of the novel, of course. And the reason why it is called Eternal City of Rome, the city setting is Rome away here, is we get to see the extent of destruction, the extent of tragedy, the extent of suffering that humans have endured or are subjected to during the war. So we just look at the certain selected section, which should be on the screen, from chapter 39, which is the Eternal City. And this is what we are examining in some details. The description of Rome, the very graphic visual description of Rome as a heavily bombed city, as a heavily destroyed city. Almost everything that has been created or constructed by humankind have been subjected to destruction or are vulnerable to destruction. And of course, it involves loss of lives as well as loss of materials and loss of signifiers of meaning. So for instance, if a monument is destroyed or broken down, what disappears is not just the materiality of the monument, but also the cultural significance which the monument had consolidated for a period of time. So it's also a loss in time and off time, not just loss of space, right? And that's something which we get to see. But as in the other sections of the novel, we see a very cynical perspective, a very hollowed out perspective on tragedy, right? And as I mentioned, the hollowness or the cynicism emerges out of a sense of exhaustion, right? It's completely exhausted of any possibilities of tragedy or any possibilities of redemption, right? So this, because tragedy contains within it sometimes a note of redemption. The tragic hero can redeem themselves, maybe through poetry, maybe through an activity, maybe through an final act of bravery or heroism, or whatever the case may be. But there is an element of redemption or redemptive potential in tragedy, which may or may not be fulfilled. But this particular novel is actually quite farcical in quality. And and I have mentioned this before, but the very famous saying or quotation by Karl Marx is first as tragedy, then as farce. Right, so the reputation of tragedy reduces tragedy into a farce, into a farcical category, which is denied of any density, any tragic density, or any poetic density, or any sense of splendor as such, right? And that farcical, hollowed out, shallow quality, the superficial quality of human suffering is something which we see over here, which ironically and perhaps paradoxically makes it more tragic that we not even have the luxury to experience tragedy anymore, because it's such a daily routine at a sort of normative level. Right, so this is the scene that we're studying today, and this is a very graphic description of a very heavily bombed Rome. Rome was in ruins, he saw when the plane was down. The airdrome has been bombed 8 months before, and knobby slabs of white stone rubble had been bulldozed into flat-topped heaps on both sides of the entrance through the wire fence surrounding the field. The Colosseum was a dilapidated shell, and the Arch of Constantine had fallen. Naples Holt's apartment was a shambles. The girls were gone, and only one there was an old woman. The windows in the apartment had been smashed. She was bundled up in sweaters and skirts and wore a dark shawl about her head. She sat on a wooden chair near an electric hot plate, her arms folded, boiling water in a battered aluminium pot. She was talking aloud to herself when Wasserine entered and began moaning as soon as she saw him. Right. So the setting over here is a brothel where Wasserine had presumably gone for sexual favors, but then everyone's just gone, everyone's disappeared, and everything is broken in shambles. There is this old woman who's just moaning to herself, mourning the loss of people, presumably, and she was boiling water on an electric hot plate, and that even the aluminium pot in which the water has been boiled is a battered aluminium pot. So it almost has a very cinematic, filmic quality, right? So we have this visual image of a heavily bombed and broken city, and in the middle of a heap of rubbish, in the middle of a heap of broken materials, we see an old woman talking to herself, perhaps mourning the loss of people, but also perhaps becoming irrational and deranged, and boiling water in an aluminium pot. So the whole thing takes a very visually cinematic quality. Okay, gone, she mentioned, or she moaned even before he could inquire, right? So she gave a response to him even before he could ask where the people are. Holding her elbows, she rocked back and forth mournfully on her creaking chair. Gone. Who? All the poor young girls. Where? Away, chased away into the street, all of them gone, all the poor young girls. Chased away by who? Who did it? The mean tall soldiers with the hard white hats and clubs, and by our carabinieri. They came with the clubs and chased them away. Carabinieri is the Italian word for police and military personnel who had, this is a colloquial way in which it's been used over here. They will not even let them take their coats, the poor things. They just chase them away into the cold. Do they arrest them? They chase them away. They just chase them away. And why do they do it if they didn't arrest them? I don't know. Sobbed the old woman. I don't know. Who will take care of me? Who will take care of me now that all the poor young girls are gone? Who will take care of me? Now, you see, this is a very tragic scene, which is represented in a pseudo-comic way. But, I am reminded when I'm reading the scene of a poor woman, old woman crying and moaning about the fact that who's going to take care of her. This is also how the final image of the first English epic, Beowulf, ends. We have this death of Beowulf, where Beowulf was being about to be, is put on his heap and is about to be put on fire, and he's dead. And this old woman is saying, who's going to take care of me now? Now the dragons are going to come, who's going to protect me? So there is a sense of an apocalyptic quality at the end of Beowulf, right? The end of an era, an order of time is coming to an end, and this very symbolically old woman who represents an order of time, who now wants to know who's going to take care of her. So it's essentially the voice of time, asking about the, who's going to give meaning, who's going to protect the world order from now on. And we have a similar situation over here, except of course there's no grandeur as in the case of Beowulf. We're talking about an old woman, presumably in a brothel setting. And Wasserine obviously is no hero. He's very much an anti-hero. We talked about that in the last session as well, how the way he's represented, there's a very hollowed out, dummy-like quality. But he's also a bit of a rogue soldier, right? He's a trickster soldier. He's a malingerer. Someone who's just feigning to be sick, feigning a performing illness, performing many different kinds of identities, which obviously makes the whole ontology of heroic military masculinity into a deconstructed category. The whole novel can be seen as a deconstruction of this idea of this grand heroic military masculinity, right? And that is being constantly parodied over here. Right, so I don't know, sobbed the old woman, I don't know, who will take care of me? Who will take care of me now that all the poor young girls are gone? Who will take care of me? There must have been a reason Wasserine persisted, pounding his fist into his hand. They couldn't just barge in here and chase everyone out. So the strange thing over here is that no one seems to have been arrested. Police just came and chased everyone out. No reason, wailed the old woman, no reason. Again, so this reputation of no reason is obviously reflective of the unreasonable and the irrational quality of the entire spectacle of war. We keep saying how the whole novel seems to have elements of absurdist theater, in the sense of everything is performative, but not just that. It's performative in a way which breaks away any causal logic, which breaks away any sense of sequentiality, right? And that's something which we see getting repeated ad infinitum. No reason, no reason. And this lack of reason, the lack of any rationale for destruction is something which is constantly flagged out. And now that irrationality becomes a category. The irrationality gets a name, and this is a name. What right do they have? What's wants to know? Catch-22. So the word appears here, Catch-22. And as you can see, the context in which it appears is the context of an absence of reason. No reason, no reason, and then you have Catch-22. So Catch-22 is no reason. Catch-22 is, in a category of irrationality. Catch-22 is a category of absurdity in many ways. What was Rain froze in his tracks with fear and alarm and felt his whole body begin to tingle. What did you say? Catch-22, the old woman repeated, rocking her head up and down. Catch-22. Catch-22 says they have a right to do anything and we can't stop them from doing. So it just becomes an absurdist status quo where anything can be done for no reason, right? So there doesn't seem to be any rationale for performing a certain act. So Catch-22 can be, it's like a free-floating signifier which can take up any signifier. And that is a post-structuralist quality of the novel, where one signifier can attach itself to several signifiers, and signifiers can be mutually contradictory in quality, right? So Catch-22 becomes this free-flowing, subversive, fascistic, consolidatory, hegemonic, all kinds of meanings can be attached to Catch-22. So it becomes this free-floating, auto-mutating signifier. So they have a right to do anything, and we can't stop them from doing. And then Wasserine wants to know, what the hell are you talking about? Wasserine shouted at her in bewildered, furious protest. How do you know it was Catch-22? Who the hell told you it was Catch-22? The soldiers with the hard white hats and clubs. The girls were crying. Did we do anything wrong? They said. The men said no and pushed them away out the door with the ends of the clubs. Then why are you chasing us out? The girls said, Catch-22. The men said, what right do you have? The girls said, Catch-22. The men said. All they kept saying was Catch-22, Catch-22. What does it mean, Catch-22? What is Catch-22? Right, so this is a phrase which begins to get almost a sinister quality in the novel. And this is a point in the novel where we see that how the sinister quality and the funny quality are not very far away from each other. There's always this proximity with death that we see. I mean, even laughter in this novel, for example, has always this very close and uneasy proximity with death. It's a laughter which comes at a cost of something, laughter out of loss, laughter out of absence, laughter out of death, right? This is hollowed out laughter, which is an exhausted activity. It's not a laughter of fulfillment, it's a laughter of hollowness, a laughter of exhaustion, right? So likewise, Catch-22 OAM becomes a signifier of absurdity, of hollowness, is complete emptied out of all kinds of meanings or possibilities. Didn't they show it to you? Wasserine demanded, stamping about in anger and distress. Didn't even make them read it. They don't have to show us Catch-22. The old woman answered. The law says they don't have to. What law says they don't have to? Catch-22. So again, you can see how this becomes an absurdist mode of self-protection and self-perpetuation. The law of Catch-22 says that we don't have to tell what Catch-22 is, right? And the law of Catch-22 says that nothing needs to be written about Catch-22. And the law of Catch-22 says that with Catch-22 you can do almost everything. So that becomes an empty phrase, that becomes a very potent and sinister phrase with which anything, as I mentioned, anything can be attached to, can be connected to. And that becomes obviously an instrument, a political instrument through which subjugation, domination, territorialization, all kinds of activities can be carried out with that phrase, Catch-22. Okay, oh goddamn, Wasserine exclaimed bitterly. I bet it wasn't even really there. He stopped walking and glanced about the room disconsolately. Where is the old man? Gone, moaned the old woman. Gone. Dead, the old woman told him, nodding in emphatic lament, pointing to her head with the flat of her hand. Something broken here. 1 minute he was living, 1 minute he was dead. Again, this sort of captures the sentiment in the novel. As you can see, there are several characters who come in and they do something and people laugh around them, and the very next second they die. Right? So life and death become so almost interconnected, mutable categories, almost interchangeable categories in this novel. So 1 minute he was living, 1 minute he was dead. So the whole idea of foregrounding the mutability, the violent velocity with which life and death can sort of swap into each other, right? This interchangeable quality about the violence of life and death. 1 minute he was living, 1 minute he was dead, right? And that becomes even the structure of the sentiment, structure of the sentence, it reflects the sentiment of interchangeability. But he can't be dead, Woserain cried, ready to argue insistently. But of course he knew it was true, knew it was logical and true. Once again, the old man had marched along with the majority, right? So again, we see this irony and paradox where the majority have, they've been killed, and the old man had marched along with the majority. Woserain turned away and trudged to the apartment with a gloomy scowl, peering with pessimistic curiosity into all the rooms. Right. So this is one of the rare instances of the novel, in the novel, where Woserain, bears or carries pure pessimism, because we see that even optimism and pessimism, they are intertwined in very asymmetric ways. So hope and hopelessness are connected together in ways which make the whole, ontology of sentiment very, very unstable in the novel, and we don't quite know what is hopeful and what is hopeless. Hopefulness can emerge out of hopelessness, just where we least expect it. But here in the novel, we find it's almost becoming tragic. It's almost becoming purely pessimistic, right? So he's looking around with a pessimistic curiosity into all the rooms. Everything made of glass had been smashed by the men with the clubs. Torn drapes and bedding lay dumped on the floors. Chairs, tables, and dressers had been overturned. Everything breakable had been broken, right? So again, the brokenness of materials, not just materials, but the meanings associated with the materials that had been broken. Everything breakable had been broken. The destruction was total, right? So this is almost a nihilistic scene where everything is just destroyed for destruction's sake. The totality of destruction, the totality of nihilism, is something that we see as a spectacle, and also something which happens around the materiality. So there's very interesting combination of mind and materiality at work over here, because what we see is a brokenness of materials, but what it also reflects is a brokenness of the mind, right? No wild vandals could have been more thorough. Every window was smashed, and darkness poured like inky clouds into each room through the shattered panes, right? So darkness pours in. Again, we have a paradoxical representation. Normally light flows in through the windows, but we have darkness pouring in like inky clouds. Woserain could imagine the heavy crashing footfalls of the tall MPs in the hard white hats. He could picture the fury and malicious exhilaration with which they had made the wreckage, and their sanctimonious, ruthless sense of right and dedication. All the poor young girls were gone. Everyone was gone but the weeping old woman in a bulky brown and grey sweaters and black head shawl, and soon too she would be gone. Right. So I will stop at this point today, but the reason why I picked this section is, it's a random section of the novel, but it sort of captures the sentiment of emptiness and hollowness in the novel, the hollowness of meaning. I mean, there's no meaning, there's no rationale for destruction. No one quite knows why this place was ransacked. No one quite knows why the people over here were asked to leave such abruptly. Right? No one quite knows why the violence was executed. And the only reason, the only word, the only empty signifier that is given as some kind of a pseudo-rationale for this was Catch-22. And the word Catch-22 consumes all rational meanings. It just takes up all possibilities of rationality. It consumes all possibilities of rationality. So there's slightly a cannibalistic quality about Catch-22. It just eats up all possibilities of meaning. It consumes all possibilities of meaning. And in that process, it just becomes a very sinister signifier, which can mean anything. And as the old woman says, that the very law of Catch-22 ensures that a law of Catch-22 should not be shown, or doesn't have to be shown. It's just something written, and no one needs to show it, no one needs to read it. It's just auto-protects itself, it auto-mutates itself, and it auto-connects itself to different categories at different points of time, right? So, and as I mentioned, we have a scene in the novel where Wesrain's prism, the focal point of Wesrain, the mind of Wesrain, it begins to become purely pessimistic. So the purity of pessimism, the purity of sadness begins to come in. Because all along the novel we see how sentiments are impurely mixed, heterogeneously mixed. So we have happiness and sadness, we have some kind of a cynical, subversive intelligence playing along with death and tragedy and horror, all mixed together. But over here, we find that for one of the rare occasions where cynicism goes away and Wesrain just experiences the totality of loss, experiences the hollowness that emerges out of loss, the emptiness of materials, the emptiness of meaning. Everything is broken, and as you can see, that wonderfully moving line that everything breakable had been broken, right? So the brokenness is not just a level of materials, as I mentioned, but also a level of mind, a level of mindfulness. There's no mind to connect to any material anymore, and that mindlessness of damage away, the mindlessness of violence away, is obviously reflective of the broader, massive mindlessness through which this war is being fought. This war is being operated as a systematic killing machine where people can be killed for no reason or no rationale whatsoever. So I stop at this point today, and as I mentioned, this is the penultimate, this is the second last class about this novel, and in the subsequent session we will wrap it up with the final section, which is called Catch-22, which is the subsequent chapter from this point, chapter 14. But this chapter, chapter 39, the Eternal City, and again, as you can see, the title Eternal City of Rome, it's a deliberately ironical title, right? Because it has this sense of timelessness, a sense of almost a mythical meaningfulness. And then we have this images of fracture, images of destruction, images of complete violence, which obviously means that no sense of mythical meaningfulness can sustain itself against such just rampage of violence. Everything breakable has been broken. So even the mythicality of Rome has been broken. Even the eternality of Rome has been broken. So the breakage, the interruption away is not just an interruption of material, but also an interruption of time, right? This sort of interruption of temporality, and that itself becomes the biggest form of violence in this war, the psychological violence. There's physical, corporeal violence, but also the psychological violence of orders of time coming to an end. So the Eternal City is obviously an ironic representation of the mutability of everything. There's nothing eternal over here. Everything can be broken, right? So everything breakable had been broken. So the eternality of the city has been broken as well. It's just another bombed city. So therein lies the paradox and the irony in the title of this chapter. And of course, we see the sort of Catch-22 becoming the instrument of irony, the hegemonic instrument or the meta-narrative of irony, where no meaning needs to be shown, no knowledge needs to be narrated, no rationale needs to be presented. So that just becomes the meta-narrative of meaninglessness, which is captured by the phrase Catch-22. Right, so I stop at this point today and we'll wind up this really magnificent novel in a subsequent session. Thank you for your attention.